President Biden, in one of his most definitive statements to date, moments ago making it clear United States aid will continue to pour into Ukraine.
So is it open-ended for now?
Yeah, it is. Look, there's no way that Putin is going to be able to cope. He's already lost Ukraine.
Made it clear. Is it open-ended? Yeah, it is. Not a pause, no hesitation. It's clear where he stands. And this comes as we're getting new video into Out Front showing a top-of-the-line U.S. artillery shell called the Excalibur in action in Ukraine. And it is incredibly precise. Take a look at this video that we have obtained. You see what is described as Russia's OSA missile defense system. It's hidden inside that building. And then in a split second, the building and the air defense system all blown up. Flames engulfing what is left of that structure. Now, CNN is reporting that the Ukrainians have been using these Excaliburs, which the United States began supplying just a few months ago with great success, right? And now it's open-ended more and more. And just look at these videos. These show the Excalibur blowing up Russian tanks. These lethal strikes are not just taking a massive toll on Putin's tanks, though, but of course on Russian soldiers, too. The daily death toll now in the hundreds, and the new weapons are hurting Putin's already deeply challenged efforts to recruit more manpower. Just hear this new report. According to the Russian independent media site Agentstvo, Putin's government is now threatening prisoners who refuse to fight in the war with new charges and longer sentences. In fact, they're saying even threatening to charge them with offenses that may be 20 years in the past, allegations. The reason is that many prisoners now are saying no. They don't want to go fight on the front lines, even if that means getting out of their penal colonies and jail cells, reportedly because they now have heard of the number of Russians dying on the battlefield. Putin needs these bodies fast because we understand that the largest number of prisoners facing these threats of go or else are in the regions bordering Ukraine, in those very regions, so that they can make the threat and get them to the front line fast. Forget all those training stops or anything even resembling that. All of this reporting comes in the context of what Putin seems to be doing, which is pushing right now a new offensive near Kharkiv, an area where Ukraine was able to drive the Russians out just a few months ago. And just when you thought the Russian government wouldn't or couldn't stoop any lower, CNN's Tim Lister and team are now reporting that this man, a former Chechen commander wanted for alleged war crimes in Ukraine, is now leading Russia's earthquake relief effort in Turkey. It's not a joke. According to Ukraine's security service, Daniil Martinov was behind the occupation of a Ukrainian psychiatric hospital in March. It said that on his orders, almost 500 people were taken hostage, including more than 100 bedridden patients. The hospital was then turned into a firing position for Russians. And now that's the guy leading Russia's relief efforts in Turkey. And it comes as the Kremlin is upping threats against the entire world tonight, warning of military and political ramifications, their exact words, if the United Kingdom sends British jets to Ukraine. The threat coming on the same day Zelensky visited London, in only his second time outside Ukraine since Putin invaded. You can see with Zelensky there receiving a hero's welcome. He then addressed a joint session of parliament. What he asked for was the fighter jets.
I appeal to you and the world with simple and yet most important words. Combat aircrafts for Ukraine. Wings for freedom.
Wings for freedom, he calls them, and the British Prime Minister's office says the UK is actively considering this request. Fred Pleiken begins our coverage out front live in Kyiv tonight. And Fred, what is the latest you're seeing on the front lines?
Well, there certainly is a big uptick in shelling that we're seeing, especially in the northeast of the country. You were talking about Kharkiv just a couple of moments ago, and that really is where a lot of that is taking place. Now, of course, it's really unclear whether or not that new Russian offensive really is already in full swing. But in general, in the east of the country, the Russians certainly have been amassing a lot of forces and using a lot more firepower, and that's laid to waste entire towns in eastern Ukraine. Here's what we see. Ukrainian towns getting decimated by Russian firepower every day. This is Mariinka in the east of the country, almost completely reduced to rubble. Around Bakhmut, combat at close quarters as Ukrainian troops tried to prevent Russian fighters of the Wagner private military company from encircling the city. Wagner boss Yevgeny Prigozhin, so confident in his own private air force, he took to the skies and challenged Ukraine's president to a dogfight. Tomorrow, I'm boarding a MiG-29, he said. If you desire, we'll meet in the sky.
To the Speaker.
But Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky is in Europe, visiting the UK's parliament, pleading for Western combat jets.
In Britain, the King is an Air Force pilot. And in Ukraine today, every Air Force pilot is a king.
Despite being much smaller and older than Moscow's Air Force, the Ukrainians are still very much in the fight in the skies. But they're losing planes and having trouble maintaining their Soviet fleet. Even a small number of Western fighters would make a big difference, says Ukraine's Air Force spokesman. We can start with a few squadrons, he says, each with 12 jets. If we have 1 to 2 or more squadrons, it would be the first step for our pilots to transition. They can be in formation and perform combat missions on different directions. The U.S. has given the Ukrainians some air-launched anti-radiation missiles called HARM. But Kyiv says those, too, would work much better if launched from Western jets. The HARM missiles aren't as efficient as if they were used from American or other Allied aircraft, the spokesman says. Their functionality is restricted. The range is shorter, making the efficiency lower. Ukrainian officials say they want U.S.-made F-16s. So far, President Biden has ruled out giving Kyiv combat aircraft, but the UK says it will soon start training Ukrainian pilots. And Ukrainian officials tell CNN they're confident they'll get jets, just like eventually they got the main battle tanks they requested. We'd like help as soon as possible, like yesterday, he says, and our partners say it will come tomorrow. And the space between yesterday and tomorrow is very important to us. And Ukraine's civilians remain in the crosshairs of Russia's cannons, missiles, and jets, while Kyiv hopes for more Western support to start beating them back. And of course, Aaron, the Ukrainians are well aware of the fact that if these jets come, if the U.S. and its allies give jets to Ukraine, that's something that's going to happen in the longer term. That could take months. It could take a couple of years. But President Volodymyr Zelensky today in the United Kingdom also said Ukraine needs more immediate help. Longer range missiles, very important right now with that offensive looming, but also more armor. The Ukrainians say that'll help them withstand that offensive and then possibly go on a counteroffensive as well, Aaron.